Earlier this week, we covered how the public overwhelmingly supports the removal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. We have new Hill-HarrisX numbers to go over now. The troops have left Afghanistan and the way in which it happened. Let's take a look.
The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. I cannot and will not ask our troops to fight on endlessly in another country's civil war.
Poll found support dropped from 73% to 64%. 79% of Democrats and 68% of independents support the move, a slight drop in support among those groups. However, in this most recent data, 45% of Republicans support withdrawing, down from 61%. So I think in some ways this really validates and vindicates Biden's decision to withdraw. We can separate out the question of the execution. We debated that at length, but the fact that it is that a majority of the American public, by double digits and by healthy double digits, still supports withdrawal, even in the face of the images we've been seeing on the news, suggests that the chatter you're hearing on cable is wildly out of step with where the American people are. Kim, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would be really interested to see also how Americans feel about troops in Iraq and in other parts of the Middle East, like Syria, keeping some of them there, to see what the sentiment is and how disconnected that all is from what you're saying, the chatter that we're seeing on the news and some of the op-eds in the papers. There is a big disconnect. Alyssa, what are you thinking?
So I take a different point. I actually think this is a pretty precipitous drop in such a brief amount of time. And I think the poll's a bit of a snapshot in time. For those numbers to drop that significantly in just a several-day period, again, we saw Afghanistan fall in 11 days. I'd be curious, a week, 2 weeks out from now, where the sentiment is. And I think that's going to be largely contingent on how the next couple of weeks go. Are we able to evacuate all Americans in a timely manner? Are we able to evacuate Afghans who helped Americans? And do we keep a lingering troop presence there, or do we actually stick to Biden's word and do full-scale withdrawal? So I think it's a little too soon to measure, but the poll is very interesting because that is not an insignificant number with Democrats, independents, and Republicans for his support for this to drop.
I mean, it is a drop, but you saw cable news playing on loop some of the scenes of chaos, and particularly the scene of people clinging to an airplane and then falling to their death off the airplane, just playing that endlessly on loop in a really disturbing kind of way. And to see the decline in support only fall to the level it did, to me, was actually more significant.
But again, this is what you and I have discussed quite a bit on this show. I agree. I think the vast majority of the public wanted out of Afghanistan. It's the way in which we did it. That's where the decline in support is. I think that, yes, most Americans, as this poll shows, do want to get out of the country, but people do not agree with how it was done. And that starts to raise questions. Should we have gotten out in the first place?
The poll also found how the withdrawal was carried out is much less popular than the policy itself. 47% approve overall, including 70% of Democrats, 52% of independents, and just 19% of Republicans. 43% think the U.S. did enough to evacuate Americans and Afghan allies, while 57% think they did not do enough. A majority of Democrats think the U.S. did enough at 60%, while 74% of Republicans and 56% of independents said the opposite. Do you think the fact that just 47% of voters disapprove of the way we withdrew troops from Afghanistan is due to the disparity between legacy media and what voters actually think? We were just kind of talking about this.
Those are really incredible numbers in this sense. They're asking specifically about the execution of the withdrawal. And you're asking, people who've been inundated by the press coverage of what was an extraordinarily chaotic scene. Relatively speaking, there were a very few number of fatalities, but those fatalities were front and center in the coverage. So to still have, 43% of people say that it went fine, and to have, a majority of independents say that we did enough to get people out of there, I think shows how desperately the American people just want to get out of that war.
But I'd caution the poll's a snapshot in time, because to answer the question, have we done enough to evacuate Americans? Well, there's between 5,000 and 10,000 Americans still in Afghanistan. So I think it's a little too soon to answer that question. And today, the Pentagon did a press briefing. Admiral John Kirby was asked how many Americans have been evacuated, and he gave the update that 2,000 additional people since yesterday had been evacuated, but only 300 of those were Americans. So I'm also curious to see, as this unfolds, the discrepancy between the prioritizing of American citizens versus Afghan allies. And think that could end up at kind of adjusting people's perception of this. If we end up leaving 5,000, 2,000 Americans behind, I'd be shocked if the polls were that high in favor of the way in which this was done.
Right. The logistics are getting to be impressive, though. So, and to your point, Major General Hank Taylor, in a briefing to reporters, said that there are now 5,200 troops at the Kabul airport. 13 C-17s have arrived with troops and equipment over the last 24 hours. 12 departed with more than 2,000 passengers and landed in safe staging areas in the Middle East. The U.S. military airlifted 7,000 total evacuees so far since August 14th. Those are impressive numbers, and I don't expect the mainstream media to move away from the scenes that they were promoting so significantly, because to us, we can separate out the two things, but for the media, they know that the withdrawal is extremely popular around the country, but they're trying to find a wedge to drive between the people who have humanitarian concern for the scenes that they're seeing and this impulse to get out of the war, because so they think they can highlight the one and then move people to supporting the war to continue forever.
I just argue the two aren't mutually exclusive. You can support ending the war, but think that we have to handle this evacuation properly. And my concern. But
let's see if they cover the effective evacuation that's ongoing.
That's fair, but the points you raised are that's an important point, that the operationality around Hamid Karzai has gotten significantly better, that we're actually getting C-17s in and out. But I'm still seeing reports, and we're seeing from some of the senators' offices that are trying to help Americans on the ground, people cannot get to the airport. They're having to go through Taliban-controlled streets. They don't have safe passage. They don't have, paperwork that's being validated by the Taliban. So there's still like a massive humanitarian issue we have to deal with our own American citizens.
Yeah, no, for sure. Still a lot of work to do.
So I agree with you, Ryan, on the media coverage on this and how the media definitely is focused on the tragedy of it. But I think that what will play into more of what you're sort of pointing out is if the conversation does shift. Right now, we're talking mostly about there's Americans stuck in Taliban territory now and they need to get out. But if that conversation shifts to the women and the girls that are going to be left and in Taliban living under their law and just kind of the general life under Taliban, then I could understand that point a little bit more of this is just rhetoric to get us back in. But right now I feel like the rhetoric is round them up and get them out.
Right, we'll see. There's still an awful lot of work to do, no doubt. And thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you next time.